then everyone else can join in a little later. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you all for joining us today and for being part of this journey with us. We're very excited to revive this network with our first online meeting. Before we get started, I would like to share a couple of notes with you on how to participate. Let's call it our Zoom etiquette. You're all muted right now, and please remain so until you want to actively participate, of course. And I also invite you to keep your camera on, like most of you already have, just so we can see each other and it becomes a little more gezellig. We also encourage you to use the chat for questions or any feedback throughout the session, and we'll try to answer it straight away. And finally, I would like to let you know that this general session is being recorded, but not the breakout rooms. Those will be in private. Yeah, so let me introduce ourselves a little bit at this point. I may be doing a lot of talking today, but behind the scenes, or in this case, behind the screens, we are a team of 4 strong. Deirdre Faraday, who is the one who called ANFP back into being. And she is a graduate student at AMS in Wageningen. Otto Buurma, who is a city planning graduate. And Ying-Tzu Lin, who is a PhD candidate at UvA. And myself, Sophia Bench. I'm the co-founder of Taste Before You Waste. So we're the Amsterdam Network for Food Planning, ANFP for short. We're an interdisciplinary and interinstitutional platform for students, young professionals, scholars, and citizens who are interested in the future of food of Amsterdam. And our aim in this endeavor is to build bridges between these worlds of practice, academia, civil society, and to address the challenge of sustainably feeding Amsterdam and its population. Yeah, and even though this is a first for us in this configuration, this platform isn't actually new. We're reviving it after a 2-year hiatus with a new team and this new online format. Yeah, we do hope to meet in the future physically, but for now this is it, ANFP 2.0. And the platform was actually founded in 2015 under the patronage of the AMS, Amsterdam Institute for Metropolitan Studies. And at this point, we'd also like to give a big shout out to anyone who was involved or attended already back then. Ying-Tzu Lin was also already part of the team at that point. So yeah, what's also new is that this year we've decided to be included within the Food Council, MRA, as the academic branch of the organization. Okay, so what can you expect from us in the near future? We will hold meetings year-round that will focus on quite a wide range of food disciplines, such as sustainable food planning, food governance, food technology, and urban agriculture. But it also really depends on what all of you are interested in and what each of you bring to the table and in what way you would like to contribute to the network. And the end of our meetings are always set aside for networking. We are primarily a network after all, and yeah, it's meant for us to form connections that we so very much need to successfully transform Amsterdam's future food system. Okay, enough about us and our ambitions. Let's get to today's topic. As you know, we will discuss the history of food provisioning for Amsterdam. Our 2 keynote speakers, Dr. Piet van Kruiningen and Koen van der Gast, will provide you with an overview of the past and present dynamics that are shaping food supplies for Amsterdammers. And to the program, I would like to say each speaker will have 20 minutes to present their topic, followed by 10 minutes of questions from all of you, and then a 5-minute break to refresh our minds and bodies. For the speakers, it's good to know that one of us, Ying-Tzu, will make you aware when you have only 2 minutes left, so you can round up in your own way. And for everyone, it's good to know that the last 15 minutes of networking in the breakout rooms that you've already signed up for. And we have decided to keep the rooms open until 6 o'clock. So in case it's a very fruitful discussion and connection, you can take your time. Yeah, I think without further ado, I shall introduce to you Dr. Piet van Krauningen, who is a senior researcher in the Rural and Environmental History Group at Wageningen University in Research, with his expertise being in agriculture, history, and water management. Today, he's going to be enlightening us on food for Amsterdam from 1400 to 1800. It's all about grains, meat, and milk. Piet, I leave the word to you.
Thank you. Yeah. So, wait a minute. Yeah. So, food for Amsterdam. So, Amsterdam was in the 17th, 18th century one of the biggest cities north of the Alps. It has about 250,000 inhabitants, and so it was the third largest city after London and Paris. And then, of course, the question is, how could, in this period, such a large city be provisioned with food? That was not so simple. This is often explained with the so-called von Thünen model, designed by a German agronomist, Johann Heinrich von Thünen, in his book, De Isolierte Staat, The Isolated State. And in that book, he designed a model of a large plain with, in the center, a big city. And then he says you can explain the type of agriculture as a function of the transport costs towards the city. And then you get a series of concentric rings in which certain types of agriculture will be predominant. So, for example, immediately around the city, you will find farmers who produce perishable products, like vegetables, strawberries, consumption milk, very important. So they are close to the city. Then a bit further, you get wood production, because wood, of course, timber is very bulky to transport, very expensive. Of course, you can also transport it over water, but okay, in the model, it is supposed it's all transported over land. Then you get, as the further you get from the city, you get less and less forms of mixed farming with a strong arable element, so grain growing especially. And then in the outer circle, you have the cattle raising. And why cattle raising over there? It is simple. Cattle can walk to the market on its own feet, so transport costs of cattle are low. So that's the idea of von Thünen. And you can use it to explain indeed the way cities were provisioned in the early modern period. Although for Amsterdam, that's a bit difficult, because as we will see, Amsterdam is in certain respects a special city. And it was not so easy for Amsterdam to get fed from its own hinterland, because that hinterland had some special characteristics. And the most important characteristic is that Amsterdam is situated in a peat area. Peat is a very special soil type. It is not a mineral soil like clay or sand. It's, well, in fact, a biogenic soil. It's composed of plant particles and lots of water. And that means it's a very wet environment. You can drain it to grow crops, but when you do that, the soil will oxidate, because when these plant particles are brought into contact with oxygen, they will oxidate. And then the level of your soil will get lower, and after a while it will get again very wet. So especially after circa 1550, it was virtually impossible to grow edible crops in the region of Amsterdam. And well, that means, well, the basic food in this period, the staple food, was bread. And that's, of course, produced from grain. But in this area, you can't grow grains anymore after 1350. So here we have the problem that the hinterland of this city cannot feed the population. Food will have to be imported from somewhere else. And indeed, already from the 14th century onwards, Amsterdam began to import grains and also other types of food. And that was, of course, also required because Amsterdam became a very large city. Well, you can see around 1400, it was still a small town. It had some 4,000 inhabitants then, but especially from the 16th century onwards, it began to grow very, very quickly. And then it reached that huge population of 250,000 people. And in the Netherlands, with all of its peat soils and its unfertile sandy soils, it was simply not possible to produce enough food to feed a big city like this. And then you should realize there were also other cities, of course, like Leiden, Haarlem, Delft, also quite large cities by the standards of that time. Amsterdam was the city in the Netherlands with 250,000. Well, to compare it a bit, Leiden had some 60,000, that was the second city, and all other cities had less than 50,000 inhabitants. So Amsterdam really was the biggest city. And it was going to need food from somewhere else. And the basic food, grains, they came from the 15th century onwards from the Baltic. So the Baltic areas, the ports of Riga, Danzig, Königsberg, those were the places where Amsterdam got its grain from. And Amsterdam, of course, was a port city with a lot of ships, a large merchant navy, and it could import all this food from the Baltic area to its own port. And from there, part of it was also re-exported again. So not all the grain that was imported to Amsterdam was meant to feed the population of Amsterdam, but it also went to other areas, let's say England, France, even Spain and Portugal when they needed extra grain. So Amsterdam now really became the center of European grain trade, and of course, Amsterdam population could profit from that too. And Amsterdam could profit from price differentials. You see here price indices for the late 16th century of grains, and then you see that in the east, where Amsterdam got its grain, Danzig, Warsaw, etc., their grains were cheap, much cheaper than the west of Europe. So the Amsterdam skippers who sailed to the Baltic could profit from this price differential. So they got cheap grain from Danzig, Königsberg, etc., and then could sell it for a higher price in the Netherlands or in, say, France or Spain. So this was a really profitable trade for Amsterdam. And it was considered so important that the people in Amsterdam called it the moedernegotie. If you would like to translate that, it's something like the mother of all trades. So this was really considered to be the basis of the prosperity of Amsterdam, this very important grain trade. And it wasn't just grain, they also imported timber and tar, etc., from the Baltic. So this, nowadays, you always hear about the importance of slavery as the basis for the Dutch prosperity in the 17th century, but in fact, the people in the 17th century themselves considered this Baltic grain trade as the basis of their wealth. So the basic food, grains, came from the Baltic, and another type of food also came from further abroad, and that's meat, or as I should say, live cattle. So here you see a map of the cattle raising areas in Europe, and you see that as von Thünen predicted, this was mostly cattle was raised in the periphery of Europe. So for instance, the German cities, they got their the meat from areas like Ukraine and Hungary and Belarus. And then that cattle was driven to the west, to the town of Woodstedt in eastern Germany, and from there it was distributed over most other German cities. The Netherlands did not get its cattle from that far away. It came mostly from Denmark, from the Jutland Peninsula. So there, oxen were raised, and then they sometimes were transported over by ship, but mostly they were driven overland through northwest Germany to the Netherlands. Hey, I'm missing. Oh, this is wrong. So I will look at this one first. Well, this is to give you an image of this cattle trade. So enormous herds of tens of thousands of animals were driven from Jutland through Schleswig-Holstein, through northwest Germany to the area of Amsterdam. And on the way, there were places where the cattle was fed and could drink, etc. But still, of course, they had lost a lot of weight when they reached Amsterdam. So then they were first sold to farmers in the Amsterdam area who fattened them again. And then when they were fat enough, they were again sold on the Amsterdam market. So now to return to the Baltic grain trade, because it was so important, I will give a short overview of how it was organized. So there was free trade. There were no import tariffs. Grains could be imported freely into the Netherlands. That, of course, was in the interest of the Dutch population too. This was not planned or organized in any way. Everything was left to private initiative. So there were a couple of hundred grain merchants in Amsterdam, and they got the grains from the Baltic to the city, and then it was distributed. It was sold in the Amsterdam Corn Exchange, and bakers or small retail traders could buy the grain, and then it was distributed that way. So the city itself hardly interfered in this trade. Only in years of scarcity, the city had a couple of warehouses, and so in years of scarcity, when the harvest had failed, then the city bought a stock of grain from the merchants and stocked in those warehouses, and then it was distributed to the bakers to bake cheap bread for poor people. And due to this important grain imports in the 17th and 18th centuries, there were no subsistence crises in Amsterdam. So other cities in France, for example, or Spain or Germany, had subsistence crisis when there was really not enough grain to feed the population. But Amsterdam could also always replenish its grain stock from these Baltic imports. So there was no serious hunger at least until the 19th century. There was one big crisis, but it was in the 1840s, that was later. But in the 17th, 18th century, this was, well, a successful system to feed the Amsterdam population. And it was also possible because from the 17th century, the second half of the 17th century onwards, Dutch domestic grain production increased too. So that was increased until, say, 1800, and from that moment onward, for a while, the Netherlands was able to feed its own population from its own domestic grain production, but that was only for a short period. And then milk. That's also a basic food in the 17th, 18th century. Here you see a map of Amsterdam in 1544, a bird's eye view of the city. Of course, still very small at that moment. But you see in the right-hand corner of the map, you see these garden-like area. So this here, that's an area with gardens and small farms. So there were market gardeners there, but also cattle farmers who held cattle to produce milk. And In the 16th century, often still these farmers had a small boat, and then they rowed that boat into the city and sold their milk there. Because milk is a perishable product, and of course there were no ways to really cool it in this period, so milk had to be transported to the city immediately. But of course, as Amsterdam became bigger and bigger in the 17th and 18th centuries, the area from which the milk had to be imported became bigger and bigger again too. So by 1700, many farmers in Waterland and Amstelland were producing milk for the Amsterdam market. And they were not selling it immediately themselves anymore to the city consumers, but they sold it to traders. Those traders had boats that could transport some 1,500 liters of milk in wooden vats. And with these boats, they sailed into town, and then young women sold the milk to the city consumers. So this was, as von Thünen predicted, this was really produced in the immediate hinterland of the city, but other products came from much further abroad. So, now to some short conclusions, Amsterdam had to import a lot of its food, especially the staple food, bread, grains, and from the late 17th century, they mostly came from the Baltic area. And then meat also came from further away, as von Thünen predicted, from a peripheral area like the Jutland Peninsula, and those animals could be driven on foot to Amsterdam. And the only thing that really came from the immediate hinterland of Amsterdam was milk and other dairy products like butter and cheese. That was only, in fact, the only food products that the hinterland of Amsterdam could produce itself. And then after 1650, domestic production, especially from grain, becomes more important until the 1840s. By that time, of course, potatoes had become a very important product for the Amsterdam population. But as you may know, in 1845, Europe was hit by the Phytophthora disease that destroyed much of the potato harvest. And then, well, since potatoes were the food for the poor, there was a really serious food shortage in Amsterdam too. And that was the only, you could say, the only subsistence crisis that hit Amsterdam after, say, 1550, 1560. And well, what we also can conclude, of course, I saw in the paper of the next speaker, he talks about city or region food systems. Well, Amsterdam simply didn't have that in this period because, well, the hinterland of Amsterdam simply wasn't able to produce the amounts of food that the population needed, only dairy and nothing else. And well, if you're interested in knowing more about this, I've given some literature, alas, almost all of it in Dutch. So I've got Melia van Tielhoff on the grain trade. Well, The Mother of All Trades, that's a book on the Baltic grain trade, and that's the only one that's in English. And she also published on an earlier period when grain came mostly from northern France. That's a book about the Hollandse graanhandel, the Dutch grain trade. Then there's a book by Wilma Gijsbers about the oxen trade, also in Dutch. And then there's a nice book by a very old dissertation by Mr. Tosseram about milk production in the Amsterdam area. That's a dissertation from 1936, and that describes the changes in the milk production and well, the milk processing in the Amsterdam area from, say, 1880 onwards. So that's my paper. Thank you very much. And I will now stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Piet. I can only speak for myself, obviously, but I definitely learned a lot in the last 20 minutes. So thank you. And we're now going to go into questions, into the discussion. So please raise your hand if you have a question and we will call you out by name. My colleague Yingzu will moderate the question discussion part.
Hello, everyone. So we will have around 10 minutes to have, I think, 2 or 3 questions. And Otto, can you please unshare the screen so I can see everyone's face? And so if you have question, you can raise your hand and I can tell you, I can call your name. Arno, I see it. Anyone? Okay, Arno first.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, very interesting. Thank you, Piet. I've always been interested in the topic because I was educated an historian. That was a century ago. But I think it's very important. And I try to relate the theme of your lecture to an issue that we debate a lot today, which is short food supply chains. And my first idea, when I hear your presentation, is for okay, this was a world where the food chains were pretty short, but not too short, because already in those days, in the 16th and 17th century, the cows made a long walk to the market, of course. And when you showed the gardens just west of Amsterdam, I thought, well, okay, well, gardening at least complies with the ideal type model of von Thünen. But then suddenly I remembered that in a book about the history of my family, which stems from the village of Monster in Holland, south of The Hague, between The Hague and Rotterdam, a horticultural area, that already in the beginning of the 17th century, some of my forefathers started a regular boat service on Amsterdam, because Amsterdam was a huge market in those days. And what they did is they transported fresh products such as fruits and vegetables. So my idea is that the notion of short food supplies, such as construed in these days, was not so simple, and that already in the 17th and 18th century is my hypothesis. There was a lot long distance travel of food products. Am I right or am I wrong?
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, those cows, they had to walk hundreds of kilometers, and the grain was imported all the way from well, Riga, places like that. And indeed, I think, especially for a city the size of Amsterdam at that time, the market gardeners living immediately around the city probably weren't able to produce enough food, enough vegetables for the city. So no, it doesn't surprise me that much that your ancestors transported fresh products from the region of The Hague to Amsterdam, because it was such a big city. Yeah. So that probably was the beginning of the Westland over there. Of course, there's a gardening area. So yeah, indeed, food provisioning wasn't that local, especially not for these large cities. There are also studies, for example, about London, which was of course even bigger than Amsterdam, and there you see that the bigger it gets, the further away the food they import. It comes from, at first, of course, from the home countries, but then later, all the way from the coast of England, you see ships sailing to London to bring food to the city. So yeah, I think indeed those lines weren't that short.
Can I say that we experts in say food transition, that we have to correct our ideas about our romantic idea of short food supply change up until the 1950s?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I see.
of course.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I see Willie has a question. He asked, what was the role of the city council to enhance or stimulate the food system? Willie, did you address to the time Pete asked, or?
Yeah. My question is, Pete said there was no, let's say, formal food system present, but on the other side there was a very, let's say, hectic trade going on. What was the role of the city council? Did they stimulate this trade, or was it just the traders who saw opportunities, and the city council was very pleased with that?
Well, of course, the traders took the initiative, but of course the city council was worried, of course, that there had to be enough imports to feed the population. And what they mostly did was that to maintain that principle of free trade. So trade shouldn't be hindered in any way. It should always be completely free. That also meant, for example, that the passage of the ships through the Sound, between Denmark and Sweden, that should also be free. And it was so important for Amsterdam that sometimes they even waged war on Denmark or Sweden to keep that the Sound free for Amsterdam ships.
Yeah.
So Amsterdam was so important they could force the Dutch Republic to declare war. And especially in the 17th century, there have been a couple of wars simply to keep the Sound free for ships with grain sailing to Amsterdam. So in that way, they were indeed stimulating this trade. Yeah.
Yeah, because Amsterdam has a vision on food at this moment, but in that time it was more like to allow trade rather than a vision on food. Or maybe that was the vision.
Yeah, they had a vision on trade, but further they left everything to the big grain traders and the retailers, and that was all. The trade, that was what we were concerned about.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, hop upon Willie's question. So since City Council is a guard for free trade, so what do they benefit from the free trade? Do they take tax from the trade? This is not free trade, right? What is the benefit of this facilitation?
The benefit, well, indeed, there's a bit of tax on this trade, not much, a little bit, but I think more important was that that imports of grain were guaranteed, that there would also always be enough food imported to feed the Amsterdam population. That was, of course, important for the city council because that was also meant to keep the population quiet. They were satisfied. And another thing was, of course, that there were very strong links between the city council and the big grain traders. They often were the same people. So that was indeed also, especially in the 17th century, the magistrates were chosen from among the rich merchants. So that was also their self-interest.
So they're loaded anyway. Okay, thank you for Pete. And I think upcoming next, we will have a 5 minutes break. Then coming back, we will have Koen's presentation about food production in Almere. And I'll give the store, sorry, Anna?
Yes, I actually had another question regarding your presentation, if I may ask it, if we have enough time.
We have like 1 minute, 2 minutes left. So okay. If you can ask the question at the breakout session as well. So keep your question, remember it, and we'll talk later.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll give the floor back to Sophia.
I think you're muted, Sophia?
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's such an amateur mistake. So thank you, everyone. That was a really fruitful discussion. We now actually go into a 5-minute break. So please grab a drink, do whatever you like to do to freshen your body and mind. And we'll see you back here at 42. And we're back. First of all, I would like to thank Amanda Edmonds for her recommendation in the chat. In case you've missed it, you can all see the chapter from the book Food and the City. Very relevant recommendation. And yeah, now we're back with Koen van der Gast, our second keynote speaker. He is a PhD candidate associated with both the Urban Economics Group of Wageningen University and Research and the Food and Healthy Living Group of Eres University for Applied Sciences, Almere. For his dissertation, he studies sustainable food entrepreneurship in the city region food systems of Almere, Flevoland. And yeah, I leave the word to you, Koen.
Yes, I hope the screen is nicely visible. So yes, I will give a presentation in which I will compare Amsterdam and Almere, in particular on the basis of urban agriculture. But before I do that, I will first say something about myself. So like Sophia already said, I'm myself in my daily job is doing a PhD in Almere about sustainable food entrepreneurship in Almere. Because of that, I was asked to give a presentation and to compare what is going on in Almere with the situation in Amsterdam. And on Amsterdam, my knowledge is limited in that respect, that I'm myself a born and raised Amsterdammer. As you see in this picture on the right, there's 3 dots where I live, so I have some experience with living on the borders of a neighborhood in Amsterdam. But my expertise does not extend towards food systems in Amsterdam. So I try to compare what I know from Almere with what I know from Amsterdam as a concerned and also a politically active citizen. And in the picture on the left, you see me on the local market in Almere, which I normally am more often than right now because of COVID restrictions, of course. So what will I do? I have roughly 2 things that I want to discuss. First, I have 3 sort of theoretical musings that I have about food in open cities. So this is not definitive proof or anything. These are just theoretical reflections that I have about the relationship between food and cities. And secondly, I will share the comparison that I made between Amsterdam and Almere. And again, I would like to stress, none of these are research results per se. These are ideas that I've been playing with. And I would really, I'm not a planner. So if there are stuff that you think you have a different opinion on, or you think you could add to, please address that in the questions and the discussion part. So the first theoretical idea that I have is really a bit of a no-brainer for someone that studies food and cities, is that food and cities are connected originally. So I'm no historian like Pete, but as far as I know, most cities, on the picture here, the first city of Uruk in Mesopotamia, and mostly emerged in fertile regions, because then it was easier, of course, to feed also the people living in the cities that were no farmers. And as Pete already discussed, there are, of course, divides in how far or distant cities and urban agriculture are close to one another, but mostly they were connected. And what we see the last century or so is this very big urban-rural divide, also because of policies made. In the Netherlands, we had Sikko Mansholt, who's shown in the picture here. He was a minister and a commissioner for agriculture, and he started a policy of never hunger again. So he wanted the Netherlands to be self-sufficient and to even be able to export their food. And for that to happen, there was a very big divide between what was produced in the rural areas and in urban areas. There was less and less food production. And now we see recently a sort of an old trend, food system relocalization, which scholars and other stakeholders argue that cities should be more aligned with food and more aligned with agriculture in particular. And that's also the city region food systems idea that Peter already mentioned. It's the idea that cities play a huge role in making these food systems more sustainable by connecting their own urban system to the regional agricultural system. So this is the point is that in general, food and cities are connected and need to be connected again. The problem is that this is not as easy as just sowing crops on the damn square. Local food is not necessarily always sustainable or better than global food, and so there's a lot of trade-offs going on. It's also known as the local trap, to always assume that local food is always better. And in a recent paper that I published with my promoters, we argue actually that the benefits of relocalization of food really depends on the context. So on the specific context of the city and the region in which it is embedded determines when and how this relocalization can occur. So in fact, it's also really important it's always about reconnecting the urban and the rural in a way that is beneficial to both and to all. And this is a very complex process. So this is not something that can be very easily accomplished. And this is also something that is ongoing in time. So, and then the last theoretical notion that I would like to share is the idea of open cities by Richard Sennett, who is an urban sociologist. And he wrote in 2006 an essay called The Open City, in which he argues that most cities right now are closed cities. So that we, citizen municipality, really try to separate functions, create very strict zones in which certain functions take place. And that actually makes it very hard for cities to grow and evolve over time. And he claims that especially at the borders between cities and regions, they should be porous, so they should be open. There should be a lot of experimenting going on. And I would argue, and it's at least what I know from Almere, and that's what I will show in the comparison that I will make, is that these open cities, they allow a better, more fertile ground, so to say, for the relocalization of food. So in sum, we see a trend. Food and cities are reconnecting, which they were from the start. But this has benefits, potential benefits in terms of sustainability, and also other urban challenges such as health. But this relocalization does not go very easy. It's a very complex process, and local food and sustainability are not equal. It's not always necessarily better to localize your food. So the process in which this involves is very complex, and therefore, you actually need open cities, open borders between region and urban areas to have experiments, room to experiment and to grow over time. So with this in mind, now let's look at the differences and overlaps between Almere and Amsterdam. And first, I'd like to discuss what they have in common, because maybe your first, especially when you're from the Netherlands, your first idea would be that Almere and Amsterdam are very different. Almere is very young, it's almost a couple of decades old. Amsterdam already a couple of centuries old. Amsterdam has this huge history, and Almere, of course, hasn't. But they also have a lot of things in common, and I will go through them one by one. First, they both border to polders that were originally created to stimulate agriculture. You have a similar trend in demographics and in dwelling, and they both cope with scarce space and the competition for multiple functions at once. So first, about these two polders. Polders is the Dutch name for the reclaiming of land. And what we see, if we compare these two, the Haarlemmermeer polder is a polder adjacent to Amsterdam. Right now, we all know it from the airport, Schiphol, but it used to be made, so to say, for agriculture now. Flevopolder, which is quite younger, this is only made in the last century. This was also originally made for agriculture. What is interesting to note is that the Flevopolder actually was inspired by the Haarlemmermeer polder. Haarlemmermeer polder also knew some trouble in terms of agriculture, a lot of famishes and poverty. So that when the Flevopolder was designed, the planners thought we should really select the best agriculturist with the best entrepreneurial spirit. So then over time, this also really shaped how the province became about. And as we see in both these polders, we see a trend. Of course, in Haarlemmermeer polder, we see the trend of urbanizing when Schiphol came there. And also the Flevopolder also know the sort of disconnect between the urban the urban centers and the rural centers. They were until recently very disconnected. The urban centers are really focused on growing in terms of population and less in terms of food. But now we see in Almere a counter trend. We actually see a lot of urban agriculture coming up. We'll show in a minute why these contrasts are so big in that sense. Another overlap that we see is in terms of demographics and dwelling. So both Almere and Amsterdam are growing cities in terms of population growth. Almere grows even faster than Amsterdam. And it was also interesting to notice that they both have a large diversity, a lot of people with migrant backgrounds. Why is this relevant? Well, when you want to relocalize your food and you have a very homogeneous population, that's easier than we have a very diverse population. My promoter always gives the example of hutspot, which is a Dutch stew. It consists of carrots, potatoes, and onions. And carrots, potatoes, and onions are all grown in large quantities in Flevoland. But what if you have a Syrian migrant that does not really like hutspot? Then it's way harder to relocalize. So also in this sense, the challenges to relocalize the food are the same in Almere and Amsterdam. What's also interesting to note is that Almere actually is also seen as a place where, for the Netherlands and their scarcity of housing, they can actually build some extra neighborhoods. And this new idea for Almere Pampas actually involves also a direct connection to Amsterdam. So these cities actually also grow more and more towards one another. The last place of overlap is the scarcity of space. You see the picture above, a big data center being built right into the agricultural land of Flevoland. And this is a problem that's known as verdozing in Dutch, or boxification in English. So more and more agricultural land is being bought and refurbished into other economical purposes. And this has all kinds of problems also in terms of culture and landscape value. And as we see in Amsterdam, there's a different contrast then between the green function of parts of the area and the dwelling, of course. More and more needs to be built. So here we see in the picture below a big skyscraper in the Western Park that actually overshadows part of the Western Park itself. So we see the similar tensions of scarce space and multiple functions that need to be addressed. So also in this sense, Amsterdam and Almere face similar challenges. Okay, so now I discussed some overlaps that they have. Then I will discuss what sets them apart in terms of urban agriculture. So what I will show is that there is an emergence of urban agriculture as an overall development in Almere. And I will show you the disappearance of one urban farm in Amsterdam. I will not go as far as saying that urban farming in general in Amsterdam is in decline, because therefore I don't have enough knowledge. But I know of one example that I think is so striking, especially in comparison with Almere, that I want to show this today. First, Almere, and the story of Almere and urban agriculture starts with a party. I don't know if it was particularly this party that was photographed, but I know that the Stadsboerderij, which is an organic urban farm in Almere, the development that they incited started with a party, because the urban farm came to Almere in the 90s, and they quickly want to expand, but the municipality wasn't really sure about it, because they did not know how important it was for urban agriculture to start in the city. And here you also see that there was a disconnect between what was happening in the city and what was happening in the agricultural hinterland. So the Stadsboerderij, they started a foundation, Vrienden van de Stadsboerderij, or Friends of the Stadsboerderij. And this foundation helped them to convince the municipality for them to be able to expand. And then this stichting, this foundation, did not stop there. They actually tried to experiment more with how urban agriculture could be part of the city. So together with scientists, also from the University of Wageningen, and diverse stakeholders, they designed an idea to implement urban agriculture in the city. And they did this through a virtual neighborhood called Agromera. And over time, actually, the municipality picked this idea up. They were planning to build 60,000 new houses, and then they implemented this idea into that. So then Almere Oosterwold emerged at the edge of the city, between Almere and Zeewolde, and Here people could buy a plot of land, and then it was mandatory for them to produce food for 50% of their plot. And so this is actually going on right now, and currently I'm also involved in research projects about how this develops. And what we see is that that the urban farm itself also bought new land there. They made the Vliervelde farm, which also tries to connect all kinds of functions of food and cities together. So we see the cycle is sort of round. And so you see that one urban farm actually incited a development of urban agriculture, in which the municipality actually played a stimulating role. Now, if we look at Amsterdam, and again, I want to stress this is just one example, and it's more anecdotal than the other one, because I know there are also examples of urban farming which are quite successful right now. But there are so many similarities with the other example that I just wanted to show it to you. It's the story of the Lutkemeerpolder, and in particular the Boterbloem, which is a small organic farm located in the Lutkemeerpolder, which is a polder near, in between the Haarlemmermeerpolder and Amsterdam, in the west of Amsterdam, as you can see on the map. The problem with this nice organic farm is that the municipality decided to change their bestemmingsplan a couple of years ago, so their zoning policy. And so they decided that this Lutkemeerpolder was not supposed to be agricultural production anymore. It had to become a place for logistical firms and big distribution centers. And there's all kinds of juridical details here that I will not share you today, but it results in the fact that there, as of now, the municipality forces this farm to leave part of the soil and to make this nice soil, this very fertile soil, into sand, which is of course is a pity. And while this farm did not go down quietly, so to say, so they mobilized support, just as I just saw show you in Almere. They mobilized support, and then they together with scientists and entrepreneurs and other stakeholders, they decided a different vision. So they built a vision which they could show to the municipality, say, look, we can combine these functions. We can combine urban agriculture, and we can combine living in the city together. And it's a similar vision as the Agromea example in Almere, as I just showed. But a big difference is that the municipality did not go for this. And they stuck to the ruling they already made. And currently, a lot of resistance and demonstrations are happening there. And the police had to evict some of the supporters for the Boterbloem. So and this is still an ongoing development, but it does not really look well. And as it looks now, this urban farm is about to disappear. So again, this is one example in Amsterdam and one example in Almere. So it's not anything definitive, but I see some similarities and overlaps that I think are interesting to discuss. So both these cities, they have growing diverse population, therefore increasingly scarce space with a lot of different functions they have to do at once. And they both have urban agriculture at the edge of the city. And both of these agriculture developments actually mobilize citizens and scientists and entrepreneurs to further experiment with what is possible with urban agriculture. And we see the big difference is the city response is completely different, and the response of the municipality. So if we then go back to the point I started off with, the open city of Richard Sennett, the idea that an open city can help to have this complex relocalization process evolve. If we look at Amsterdam, we see more a closed city. What Sennett understands, a grip of rigid images, precise delineations. The urban imagination lost vitality. So what we see here, and I also spoke to two council members of the Dutch Labour Party about this, and both said, one of them said, this is just juridically speaking, we cannot do anything about this. This is a done deal. And the other one was a bit hesitant at first, and then I further explained the benefits of urban agriculture and what it could do. She was more open to it, but she also said, there are not many politicians that really, in the city that really have the feeling that they should go beyond the rules.
2 more minutes.
Yes, I'm almost done. And there was also recently there was a Groenvisie, which was an opportunity for citizens to also speak up about greening the city, and also the point about the Lutger polder was made. And again, the municipality hid behind this difficult dossier. So they stick to certain rules instead of to what they think is right or just. And then if we look at Almere, we see there they have the same challenges as Amsterdam. And of course, also the municipality was not really on board from the get-go, but they really tried to make it happen, and it really helped in increasing this urban imagination. So this, and just to stop right here, this is just a thought that I had when I was making this comparison. And like I said before, my knowledge about Almere is more extensive than about Amsterdam, but this is just a very hypothetical that I posed to you. Do you think this story that I just told you resembles the truth? And as a planner, do you think that is this a realistic expectation of Amsterdam? Can it ever be as open as Almere? Is Amsterdam really a closed city? And do you think that actually creating these porous borders between rural and urban areas actually help creating this food system recolorization? So these are just conversation starters, so to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Koen. Very nice presentation. And I will just jump into the question because I already collect, I think, 3 questions here. So I think first, Arnold asked one question. He asked, Amsterdam and Almere are constructed as twin cities. So how does it work out in food planning?
As twin cities, yeah. Well, that's what you see in terms of population and dwelling. You see very similar developments, like I said. But I think that it also really depends on and who's inside of the municipality and who makes the policy. And what I've heard from the development of Oosterwold is there was one alderman that was really enthusiastic about it and really went for this and really helped in the stimulation of this. And this is also something that you need. I think you need politicians that actually believe in an idea and then try to bend the rules towards the idea instead of the other way around. I don't know if that really answers the question, but
we can leave it to the discussion. And like Harry has a question. He asked, how should we define city and city regions here? Like he said, like, you could argue that the urban agriculture moves from one part of the city region to another by means that's like, if we talk about Food Council, MRA, like regionally, Almere is also part of this MRA. Yeah,
that's an excellent point. I agree. I think in terms of city region food systems that Almere and Amsterdam would be definitely part of the same region. And this is also something my promoter always says, that in terms of local, we should really not make the mistake of looking too small, because in the Netherlands itself is a city in terms of its how big it is in comparison to other countries. But I do think that there are still cultural differences, and you also see that these developments. That's why I found the difference so striking, because I'm working day to day in Almere, and you see a very different development going on there than in Amsterdam. Well, they actually are just so this close to one another. So that's actually the interesting thing, that they're in a way part of the same city region food system, but then something as pivotal as urban agriculture is dealt with in such a different way. So that actually makes it even more intriguing, I would say.
I think that's a very interesting point. Although geographically they're very close, but administratively they still belongs to two different provinces and 2 different cities. So you have 2 different governance structures. And exactly. I think the MRA like try to put a larger scale, like to combine them together. But as far as I understand, like still very difficult in terms of governance. So that jumps to Toby's question, which Toby asked, what rules would the gemeente have to change to stimulate and enable urban agriculture? And how does that relate to upcoming
omgevingswet? Yeah, it was a good point. Actually, I really like that the notion of the omgevingswet, because Oosterwold is actually on the website of the national government. as an example of a nice way to deal with the omgevingswet, because in the omgevingswet, for people that don't know it, it reduces the complexity of the laws. It goes from 150 laws to 15 or something, and it also stimulates active participation of the environment. And they consider Oosterwold to be an example of this, and that is interesting because I know someone who was part of this whole development, and he says, yeah, the national government was really not a great help in that. So it's also, I think it's also interesting to see that these sort of things shift when they become successful. So then people are starting to claim them. So this is a slight deviation. What rules are necessary? Yeah, I think it's not that necessary about rules. It's about how rules are made and how they are how they are maintained. I would say that in this example of Almere, there were no rules yet for Oosterwold, and I think they try to fit it into the existing legal framework. But the fact that politicians and stakeholders alike were all part of the same movement of trying to make this happening is more important than having rules on forehand in place to stimulate that. So it's also really about how I think that's also the point of Senate, that it's really about coping with these rules and not believing that they're like natural laws, but actually make them also fit the context better.
I think it's also about like what political values these aldermen have, and what leads to the governance structure and tools that they could use to stimulate the development of urban farming or not. So and then we also have Ruben, says like, besides reconnecting people with food and aesthetics looks, how efficient it is actually. Urban farming is supplying food for millions of people in the urban area.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, I think it's not really necessary about it. That's actually the point that in my paper I'm making, that food system relocalization is not a goal in itself, because in some instances it's way more efficient to have production in one place and other functions in another. So it's more about how can you make these borders less strict. So that's what I like about urban agriculture, is that you can let food production emerge, not necessarily because you want to produce there the most efficient, but because you want to let people get acquainted to food and to make it more part of everyday life. And now, as we have now in these big cities where food production is outsourced, we don't really know how our food is made anymore. We don't really engage with it anymore, which also leads to less healthy food practices. So I think I think again, it's a good point. We should always bear in mind when we talk about food system relocalization, how efficient it is to do it. But that's why I like the Oosterwold example so much, because it really helps to see food production as happening in an agricultural hinterland as part of an urban development. So then it's not necessarily only about the efficiency of food production anymore, but it's also about other function that food production has in society.
I think it's also very much about how we try to include new values into the food system. So if we're still in this world trade food system, then yes, like selling the potato produced in Almere to France, and then buy new potatoes produced from France might create more economic value than you consume the local potato produced in Almere. But in the sense that the cost is, of course, carbon footprint, etc., etc. So I think it's also a matter of value change instead of how much food you could actually supply.
I agree. Yeah.
We have 3 minutes, so I'm trying to ask the last question, and the rest we have a lot of questions follow up, and the rest we could leave to the breakout session. So Amanda asked, how is urban agriculture being positioned among other food relocalization efforts system at the other locally or regionally produced food? And what is the strategy in Almere and in Amsterdam for the framing of the issue?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I don't think there's a sort of an end goal here, at least not in Almere. I think Almere as a municipality really wants to position themselves as a city which produces most of its food locally. So they actually have like 10 or 20% of their food consumption that they want to produce locally. But I think that most, the Stadsboerderij, for instance, that came there, they really had a more, they really have ambitions in terms of connecting urban and rural regions, and also making it more sustainable. So I think there are many different values in place. And I also think that urban agriculture itself also incites developments, other developments in terms of food. So for instance, in Oosterwold, you see now a lot of people working with permaculture, with vertical farming. So I think all these developments stimulate new ones, and I don't think there's necessarily an end goal or strategy. It's more about letting these developments unfold and giving the time and the place they need to unfold over time. And I think that is actually what happens, at least in Oosterwold as of now. And I think that, that also in terms of what it means for food system relocalization, we cannot say right now, I think. But what we do see is that this pressure to produce for the city, is also met with different responses. Some people are like, let's do that. Let's build 100. Let's produce 100 pumpkins for the city. And then other people are like, but can we really do that? And I have a full-time job at the same time. So these are all different tensions that come up just from this development itself, which I think that's what I think is interesting as a student of change.
Thank you, Koen. So I see way more questions and discussions at the chat room, and I will leave it to further more discussions at the breakout sessions. So I'll give the floor back to Sophia, and I hope after 5 minutes of break, and we will start our breakout session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Ingtu, and everyone for the very interesting discussion. I've been following urban food production mainly from like an activist standpoint, and this theoretical framework really helped me to see the bigger picture. So thank you all. And before we go into the break and into the breakout sessions, I would just like to let you know a few things. So we have upcoming meetings in January and March, which we haven't decided the date on, but wanted to already give you a little taste of. In January, we will be hosting a session on thesis networking, and in March on food surplus. And for future meetings, we would also like to let you know that you should feel very free to get in touch with us about hosting or contributing in some way, because this is a network after all. So you're all very welcome, and we will send a follow-up email which will include a link to the recording that we made today, the literature suggestions that we've been collecting, and we would also very much appreciate feedback if you have any for us on the content, the format, anything really. And I would also like to just give an open call for anything you would like to share with everyone who is in this meeting now before we go into the separate rooms. Any announcements? Is there anyone who would like to share? Okay. Toby Jones, I believe you had a... Okay. Okay, if that's it, then we go into the break, and then everyone will be divided into their breakout rooms, and we will continue discussing on these topics and on thesis topic and a miscellaneous general topic. Okay, see you all in 5 minutes, or only some of you actually.